Welcome to Sound Bites. I'm your host, Jennifer Chandler. Today I'll be talking with Tiffany Werne, who is the Southeast Mid-Atlantic Regional Manager for Pasqua Winery, all about sparkling wines that will be perfect for your New Year's Eve celebration. Sound Bites is the Daily Memphian's weekly food, drink, and dining podcast. You can tune in on WYXR Radio every Thursday at 11 a.m. or listen wherever you get your podcast, iTunes or Spotify, or listen at dailymemphian.com. If you are listening on WYXR, up next you can listen to Sidebar with Eric Barnes. But now let's get started talking about New Year's Eve and sparkling wines, because in my opinion, that is the one night you have to drink a sparkling wine or champagne or something with bubbles. Don't you agree, Tiffany?
Absolutely. You definitely want to bring in the new year with a toast of amazing bubbles.
So it's one of those things I kept wanting to say celebrate with champagne, but it's really, champagne is a very small segment of the sparkling wines industry, correct?
Yes.
So sparkling wines is the overall thing that you should say. And then there are different types of ones like champagne, Prosecco. I'm sure there are other things that I can't think about. Cava. So can you kind of explain what the difference is there?
Absolutely. So the main difference in these categories first start out with place. Champagne is an area in France, and it's actually a town in France. So it's known for producing some of the finest champagne in the world. Whereas Prosecco, on the other hand, is a type of sparkling wine that's produced in the Veneto, in the northeastern part of Italy, in a town called Treviso. Cava, for example, is also a sparkling wine that's produced in Spain. So you have different areas, different regions that call bubbles or sparkling wine different things. And that's one of the main differences. Another difference would be the grape varietals in which therein lies. So Prosecco and Champagne, for example, with Prosecco, the grape is Glera primarily. And then with Champagne, you have three different grape varietals. So you have Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Pinot Meunier.
Okay. A Pinot Noir makes a champagne, because I always think a Pinot Noir is a red grape. Not a white sparkling, wine. It
is a red grape, and it is used also to make rosé champagne. But also at the same time, there's a few producers that use Pinot Meunier. There's a few producers that don't, and that's also a red grape as well. So it's interesting that the skins are removed, so that's why there's no color when someone uses Chardonnay and Pinot Noir or Pinot Meunier. When you leave the skins on, that's where you'll get the color.
So is there a difference in flavor when you talk about things like looking at a champagne versus a cava versus a prosecco, or whether it's from France or Spain or Italy, which I have to tell you, everyone who's listening, if you're not familiar with the Pasqua wines and the Pasqua Winery, it is an Italian winery in the Veneto region. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So Tiffany here is an expert on all things wine, but in particular is knowledgeable about Italian wines. And if you have not tasted any of the Pasqua wines or their sparkling wines, you need to seek them out, because they're great, and they're kind of an affordable price point too, which is one of those things that makes it attainable to be able to serve it at your home on a regular basis. But they're also perfect for a special occasion.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. One of the reasons that make that price differentiation is because that's another difference in these types of bubbles. So the method by which it's made is another big reason for a little bit of that differentiation, and also the flavor profile that you were talking about. So let me just explain. In Champagne, they actually ferment the wine, the sparkling wine, in a bottle. So it goes through secondary fermentation in the bottle, which creates a lot of yeast, a lot of flavor, so more bread, toast, brioche style components are created by the Chardonnay, the Pinot Noir, depending upon the blend, and sometimes it can be a single grape varietal. Then with the Prosecco, it's Glera, but it goes through a process called Charmat, and that's stainless steel tank, and it goes through secondary fermentation in the tank. And the reason that I talk about that is that with Champagne, it's a little bit more labor intensive, whereas with Prosecco, it's not as much. With Prosecco, you get more of a bright, more like citrus, pear, apple flavor.
Oh, I can definitely see that when you're talking about doing something in the bottle. And when I think about it, you're right. If I've had a Champagne from France, it is that kind of like more yeasty, that bread. Brioche was the perfect word for that when you've tasted it before. Whereas I would have described a Prosecco as maybe lighter and crisper a little bit. It would be my layman's term for what I'm drinking.
Exactly. I mean, that's the thing is that, Prosecco and even Cava, really bright, really fresh, nice fresh acidity, but, you're not getting that rounder, warmer note. Then when you move up, or move to Champagne, move to a different area, you're really getting more of this intense, deeper style. You still get acid and you still get fresh acidity, but at the same time, it's a little bit deeper.
Now, is there a difference in the amount of, especially since they're kind of fermented differently, is there a difference in the amount of bubbles? Does one have more bubbles? Is one more bubbly or effervescent than another?
Basically, the Champagne, because it is actually all trapped in the bottle, it produces a little bit tinier bubbles than, say, a Prosecco that has the vat in the stainless steel tank. However, the time in Charmat makes a difference. So when I say that for a Prosecco or a Cava, you're going to get, the bubbles will be a little bit larger. But if they let it stay a little bit longer, they will be smaller than they would if it was a 30-day Charmat process versus a 60-day Charmat process. However, with Champagne, you're going to get tinier bubbles because it is in that bottle to ferment for that period of time.
It's a smaller place. I remember once visiting, this was years ago, I was in France and I went and toured Veuve Clicquot's winery, and interesting to see all those bottles there. And do they turn them? Is Champagne turned as well?
Yes.
To kind of keep it from, like, they could literally go at their winery. I think they said that they go and hand turn all the bottles that are like in these ancient caves on these wooden racks.
They do. And fortunately, I have been able to tour those caves and see those riddlers is what they're called.
Okay.
And there's only a few riddlers left in the world right now, but some of your top Champagne houses still have a riddler where they hand turn the bottle a quarter of a turn, and they're down in the caves with the light on their head doing that, and that's to mix the yeast because it kind of gets bottlenecked in that neck of the bottle, and it actually spreads it out once that turn comes. So that's what it's for, and it's done by hand at some of the top Champagne houses in the world.
Wow. And we may have said this, and I'm not remembering it, but like for a sparkling wine to ferment, how long is it fermenting for? Is it for a day? Is it for a month? Is it for years?
No. So primary fermentation takes really just a couple of days, whereas secondary fermentation takes a little bit longer than a week or two. But, and that's for the process for the yeast to eat up the sugar and, the alcohol to convert to CO2. But when I say that, as far as a bottle laying down or something like that, it can continue to age. And that's why they continue to turn it and riddle it so that yeast doesn't settle.
Okay, so I have a question for you. I am walking into my favorite neighborhood wine shop, and I want to find the perfect bottle of sparkling wine for my New Year's celebration. Of course, you're going to tell me to go look at one of the Pascal sparkling wines, which I wouldn't blame you. And I'm going to get you to tell me about what makes them special. But what are some of the things that I should go in and ask for to the person who works there, what I'm looking for?
Well, when you walk into a store about sparkling wine, people are going to ask you more than likely what you're already familiar with. And it really starts to get into that flavor profile that we talked about. But also there are different, styles, extra dry, brut, demi-sec. And that's going to tell you different levels of, sugar content and alcohol content. But basically, if I'm asking you or you're walking in to see me, I'm going to ask you what kind of bubbles you're looking for, what you're going to do with it. Is it just for a toast? Are you going to have food with it? But what style are you looking for, an extra dry, a brut, or that demi-sec? Extra dry is not as dry as a brut, which a lot of people don't realize. Brut is drier than extra dry. And then your demi-sec has slightly sweetness, has a little bit of sweetness to it.
So is there one of those three styles that's a little bit better just for sipping for a toast?
So sipping for a toast, just right off the bat, off the top, is just an extra dry, regular, champagne or sparkling wine, I should say. And then what you want to do with that is that if you're having fruit or you're having any kind of light appetizer, things like that, that really works for that. But just a toast. Now, if you're somebody that drinks really dry wine, regular, still wine, and you want to celebrate and you really are looking for a really dry style with nice fresh acid that's going to keep, and we talked about those toast and those brioche notes, you would go with the brut style because you're going to get more depth, more intense flavor, and that's on both sparkling wine and champagne. And then with demi-sec, you can have slightly sweeter wines, like an Asti Spumante, which is much sweeter, or you can have a demi-sec that's got some kind of a mid-level of sweetness. And that would be for somebody who wants just a touch of that, kind of residual sugar that's going to come back in the back of your mouth. And instead of feeling acid, you're going to still taste the fruit.
And do those kind of things to keep in mind, those different kind of, I guess the three different, I guess it would be called classifications.
Yes.
Do those apply also to like a rosé champagne?
They do, and that's kind of exciting because we, in Italy, we were able to introduce the Prosecco Rosé for the very first time. It was actually approved in May of 2020. So now the Veneto can produce a rosé, but you can have an extra dry style of rosé, and you can have a brut style of rosé that is extremely dry versus the extra dry, which is still going to have that strawberry-like fruit to it.
Right, because there is a little bit more of a difference between a traditional sparkling wine versus a rosé, is there is a little bit more fruitiness to it than that's what the difference is primarily, correct?
Exactly. And it's really important to note that, when you're talking about residual sugar and sugar, we don't mean, syrupy sweet. We really are talking about the fruit. So we know about different types of fruits and spices and things. So when you talk about rosé, you think about strawberry, raspberry, those kind of undertones. And then also, too, when you get some nice fresh acid that either comes underneath that or not.
Okay, that's so interesting. Okay, so I've picked out my perfect bottle and I have brought it home. What do I do with it? Do I stick it in the freezer to make it chill real quickly? I'm assuming not. What is the best way to store your sparkling wines? And then we'll talk about serving them.
Okay. Well, one of the reasons that you wouldn't want to do that with the freezer is because if you're like me, you might forget that it's in there.
I think we've all had that happen. It's not a pretty sight.
It is not.
When it explodes.
So what you want to do is you want to store your sparkling wines, your champagne, anywhere between 43 and 47 degrees. 45 degrees is the temperature that, that you want to serve it at. But between those 2 degrees,
so that's
it'll be
why
okay.
You should have a wine refrigerator and not stick. Because my refrigerator these days has it shows you, and it's always at 38 degrees. So it's a little too cold.
Too cold, just a little bit. But when I say that, it's okay to be there. Just make sure, because you're going to take it out and put it on your counter or something like that. Our homes are too warm, and your fridge is a little cold.
Right.
But where we live, it's very humid too, and hot a lot of times. So it's okay to do that. Just know that it probably needs to, come down a little bit and the coldness
to
get
the
to
chill
that
off
like, to
the
take the
room
chill off a
temperature.
little bit. And the main reason that is too, Jennifer, so that you can enjoy those flavor profiles, how we've talked about brioche and we've talked about strawberry and different pear and apple and those things. When your wine is too cold, and this goes for still wine as well, you will mask the flavor profile of the wine. So it tastes very refreshing because that's what we're used to. It's really cold things, but you're not going to pick up all that brioche or all that nice ripe, strawberry or anything like that if the sparkling wine is too cold.
That's good to know.
And as you bring it out and it warms up, that's when the flavors start to expose themselves.
Okay. That's almost kind of like when you have a nice old red wine that you want to air it out a little bit so that you have more flavors. Because when you first open an old one, it's almost can be off-putting or a little bit more too tannic, I guess is the word. But if you let it get some air get to it, and I guess let it come to the right temperature, then you can taste the different flavor profiles, and it becomes more complex.
It becomes more complex as it begins to open up, and it reveals itself through the time frame that you've allowed it to basically breathe. Right. And that's the same with any type of wine. It's just that some of them don't have the staying power for a long period of time, like a red wine that has been aged in oak, and a lot of that labor intense part from all areas really plays part in what's going to come out in the flavor profile.
So when I go to serve my champagne, I'm assuming a red solo cup is not ideal. But do you really always need, is the flute, is there a reason for the flute? Is that just for looks, or is that actually have a scientific reason behind it?
Well, one of the things about the flute, and one of the main things about the flute, besides the fact that it's very elegant and pretty and all of that, is that it allows, if you have a flute that has a pivot at the very bottom, it allows you to enjoy those bubbles. And so the bubbles will actually, the CO2 in there will actually cause the bubbles to continue to spiral around in your glass while you're enjoying it. So you can.
It's always pretty to watch and see.
It's beautiful to see it, and it really encapsulates the flavor profile, but also those bubbles so that they're in a streamline. When you pour them into like a wider,
I was
wine
going to
glass.
ask about, I've seen people use coupes. Is there, you should use it, but you're suggesting a flute versus a coupe, or does it matter?
Well, no, a coupe, and I have a coupe at home that actually, it's a cool coupe because it actually causes the bubbles to spin around in a donut.
Oh, wow.
And so instead of that streamline, it will go around in a donut. And it's the way that the glass is cut on the coupe. But the coupe actually came from Dom Perignon. Actually, when champagne was discovered, it was shaped after a woman's breast.
Oh, very interesting. I can see it now. A little historical fact.
That's a little historical fact there for you. But coupes were very popular, many, many years ago. And then flutes became popular. And now there's all different types of vessels, like the one that I have, the coupe that I have that does the donut.
So I guess the rule of thumb is to make sure when you're looking at glassware for a sparkling wine is to get one that is made to serve sparkling wine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just because, you're investing in it, whether it's a Prosecco, a Cava, or a champagne, you want to start enjoying the wine from the minute that you take it home. And the nose, the color, all of that. But then when you use the correct vessel for your wine or your sparkling wine, you're already starting to get the enjoyment out of it. And with New Year's, it's festive and celebratory, and why not just dive in there with all of that, right?
I know, I agree with you.
Cheers and have a toast and, look forward to the new year. You got to have the right glassware.
I agree with you. Okay, and so this is another question that happens every once in a while, not very often. But if I have some champagne at the end of the evening that we have not consumed, we decided to open one more bottle and we only drank half of it. What is the best way to keep that wine so maybe I can use it the next day in something?
Well, we're blessed now because there's a lot of wine stopper products out on the market, and that's really all that you need. You can get a pump where it actually pumps in the CO2 and you can seal it, but just a regular champagne wine stopper, as long as it's one that fits the bottle that you buy. You need to make sure, because if it's too loose, then air will get in and it will cause the bubbles to dissipate. But as long as you trap the air, you will be fine. And most of the wine shops that you will be purchasing your champagne or sparkling wine and will have the right champagne stopper. You can put that champagne stopper on there. Now, every time you open it, of course, it's going to release a little bit more air, which will start to deflate the bubbles. But one thing I will tell you, and if that does happen, you just have to set your mind up. Most of the time, a really good product will still taste fine. You just won't have the effervescence anymore.
Okay. Oh, that's a good thing to know. And I guess on that same note, so if I open a bottle of sparkling wine and we're serving it, if there's still some in the bottle, I should be putting a lid on and instead of leaving the bottle open while the evening is still going on.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, to maintain those bubbles, to maintain that air. I mean the CO2.
Yeah, because normally we just pop it open and then I put it in the ice bucket and then we just fill it. I never think to close it then, but I'm going to change that this year for sure. You're listening to the Daily Memphian Soundbites with me, Jennifer Chandler. Today we're talking with Tiffany Werne with Pasqua Wines about sparkling wines for your New Year's Eve celebration. If you're tuning in on WYXR, keep listening for the Sidebar with Eric Barnes after this. If you're listening through your podcast app, be sure to subscribe. You can also find our other Daily Memphian podcasts, The Sidebar with Eric Barnes about art, culture, and more, Grizzlies Pod with Drew Hill and Chris Harrington, Behind the Headlines Podcast Edition, and On the Record, an occasional political podcast with Daily Memphian legend Bill Dries. So we've talked all about sparkling wines and such, but I think we need to talk a little bit about Pasqua Winery and what it is, what this winery is, and what are some of the wines that we can find here in the Memphis area to enjoy, because I've enjoyed several of them at wine tastings and restaurants around town, as well as picked some up to enjoy at my own table at home.
We've been very blessed at Pasqua Winery and the city of Memphis to be able to have a lot of the portfolio here in town. So our Prosecco is called Romeo and Juliet Prosecco.
Oh, I love that name.
And we basically have a line of wines, a Bianco and a Rosso, with that very same name. And that's the family wanted to pay homage to their hometown, to the city Verona, where the bust of Juliet is.
It's in that same Verona is in the Veneto region.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's the major city, Verona. And so to emulate the passion of the city and to emulate the passion of the winery, they commissioned the city to take a picture of the actual signatures of the wall at Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, that's
that 3,000 people visit a day. So when you see our Proseccos, you'll see the Rosé and you'll see the Brut, and it will have a picture of the wall with all the writings, and so will the Bianco and the Rosso. The Bianco is made with Garganega, and and the Rosso is made with Merlot, Corvina, and Croatina. Those are both Appassimento, which basically means that the grapes sat outside to dry under the sun after they were hand-picked and hand-pruned. So it's a really great process, but it also kind of opens the world up into the Soave and the Valpolicella region for you at a very affordable price point. The Proseccos that we have are, like I told you, the Brut and the Rosé, and then we also have one that's called Party Like an Italian, and it's our new extra dry.
Party Like an Italian. I love this. I love this. It is. You guys have some, your bottles are fun to look at. They're like little pieces of art. If you've never seen them before, next time you guys, everyone listening, when you go into a store, just ask the person behind the counter where the Pasqua wines are, just to have a look at what they do. But the flavors are great as well. So Pasqua Winery, it's in Italy, but we're here in the United States. And with your region, do you cover 11 states?
I do. I cover 11 states, and this is the first time in my career where I've gone all the way up through the Mid-Atlantic. So I have Tennessee, Mississippi, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, Arkansas, Alabama, all of your major southeastern region. But then I move up into Washington, Virginia, Pennsylvania area. So I go all the way up through the Mid-Atlantic.
So you have been in this business for a long time, because we were giggling earlier that I have Tiffany in my phone with a importer group that she was probably with 15, 20 years ago?
Yeah.
Could it been that long? It's been a minute.
It has been. Actually, I started with the Grateful Palate in 2007.
Okay.
That's when I left Buster's after 20 years.
So yeah, so you first started off at Buster's, and now you basically the rest of your career for the past 2 decades, you have been an expert in the particular wines offered by the particular wineries or the importers you've represented, correct?
Yes, and I appreciate that. But yes, it has really been a great journey. First working at Buster's for all of those years where I was able to get 2 sommelier certifications. And then I moved on into the region or the country of Australia when I worked for the Grateful Palate. And then in 2011, I became the regional manager for Frederick Wildman & Sons, which was France, Italy, Argentina, and Spain. And then now I work directly for the Pasqua family, which has been great to work directly with their family in Italy. So it's been quite a journey to kind of move up through the wine world, but also too just lots of fun and being able to talk about it and always get exposed to new things along the way.
Right. Well, it seems like you've kind of covered a large part of the world in your wines that you've represented, and you've had to learn it. And anybody I have to give her a shout out. If you ever see that there is a wine event happening and you see Tiffany Werne's name related to it, you need to go, because I really feel like you are the most, I'm going to probably get myself in trouble here saying this, but you're one of the most knowledgeable people in Memphis about wine.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. It's been, when I very first got started, it was one of those things that I challenged myself to be able to learn, and I wanted to learn about it. And being able to span across these different career opportunities has really aided in all of my education. We have been lucky in Memphis to now gain some more folks that are on board to learn about wine. But one of the main things that I try to do is make it relatable.
I was going to say that. I was going to give you a plug, is because you may know all the scientific things behind it, but you describe it in a tasting and are always welcome to questions, so that you make somebody like me who enjoys wine, but I'm definitely a layperson when it comes to all of this. And so I always learn something when I'm with you, and I feel more confident than when I leave one of your wine tastings. And then when I go into a wine store myself to purchase wine, I feel like I know a little bit more about what to ask for.
Oh, that makes me so happy. And that's really one of the things that I find rewarding in my career, is that I'm able to teach people about something that it may, not cross their path to learn about right away. No one should have to know about it. It should be a fun experience. And that's what I try to bring to everybody. And I want, at every tasting, I want someone to go away knowing something that they didn't know before about wine. And I've cultivated a large following and a large group of customers that continue to this day to come to tastings, to buy Pasqua and buy different wines because of that education.
That's great. And you could be found also, it's not just a wine dinner at a restaurant, which you do those often. Mm-hmm. You can often be found at a wine store like Buster's Wines and Liquors, doing on a Friday afternoon doing a tasting.
Absolutely. That is really the best way for people to be exposed to our different types of grape varietals. When I talk about the Valpolicella region, or I talk about a grape called Corvina or Gorganiga, you're not going to know about it unless you come and taste it, because you haven't been as exposed to it. But that's really what I could be doing at any given day. I've got a couple other tastings coming up, and it's just exciting. That's the fun part of the job.
That's great. And I have one final question. I'm going to put you on the spot. What sparkling wine are you going to be enjoying on New Year's Eve this year?
Wow, that is kind of putting me on the spot. I'll definitely be having some Pasqua Prosecco Brut because that's in my wheelhouse, and I'll definitely be having it. But more than likely, I will also step up, and I really enjoy. I was able to go to Ruinart a while back, to France a while back, and I went to the Ruinart winery, and I love their Blanc de Blanc. So I will for sure probably try to procure a bottle of that. Blanc de Blanc is one of the highlights that I used to sell when I sold Paul Roger wines, sparkling wines from France or champagne from France. And that Ruinart I love. Another wine that I really love a lot is Billecart Saumon Rosé.
And where's that one from?
And that one's from France as well.
Okay, okay. Got some tips there. Well, Tiffany, thank you for joining me today on Sound Bites. I can't tell you how much I have learned in our conversation, and I'm hoping everyone that has listened has learned as well. We'll have more about this on thedailymemphian.com, where you can kind of have a summary of our conversation today to get some of the highlights.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, lady.